Hello, and thank you for joining us for our third episode of Sharp Ideas, where we bring you the stories behind some of the world's most successful artists and the organizations, companies, and projects they've created. My name is Natalie Higgins, and these are my co-hosts, Jonathan Bhatia and Martin Hackleman. And today we are joined by Peter Pickett, owner of the innovative company Pickett Brass and Blackburn Trumpets. In 1999, after emerging from school with degrees in both trumpet and engineering, Peter did what many of us spend our whole lives dreaming of. He combined both of his passions into a successful career. Well equipped with expansive knowledge of management, marketing, mechanics, and software from his day job, Peter first began by tinkering with trumpet components such as valve caps and buttons. Later, after receiving solid feedback from internationally renowned artists, he expanded his business to include mouthpieces and later trumpets. Today, Pickett Brass and Blackburn Trumpets are household names in the music world. Their team is well represented at national conferences as well as the growing media world, and their unique designs are recognizable across international concert stages. We are happy to welcome Peter Pickett, owner of Pickett Brass and Blackburn Trumpets, to Sharp Ideas to tell his remarkable story.
Very good. Hey guys, thanks for having me.
So John has a interesting question to start off with. We were just talking about this one.
This is a mystery question, and I feel like there's no better way to start this discussion than by asking you, Peter, what mouthpiece do you play?
It's a Bach 3C. No, I'm just kidding. I play a Pickett, of course, a 6C, and after long years of playing mouthpieces that were too big, finding my way down to a smaller size has worked itself out.
Yeah, great. And I'm in a similar boat as well. I always was taught from the let's go the more efficient route, more compact route, which I'm sure you've heard from Yen several times. Anyway, thank you. I know Natalie said it before. Thank you for joining us. And, it's always great to have people like yourself on this show. And it's always great to start, kind of like from the beginning. Like, when did you start first playing trumpet, or when did you first start getting into music?
Yeah, so music has always been a part of my life, whether I liked it or not. My parents were both symphony and opera goers, and Dad was a piano tuner and played a lot. So I was exposed from day one, if not before, to whatever was on the radio at the time or whatever was playing. So that's really just having that exposure at an early age probably made me have some appreciation that I did not appreciate until later. But ended up playing piano like all little kids do, and parents made me do it even though I didn't want to do it. And so that was a good foundation in hindsight. But yeah, it all started with piano, and then started playing trumpet, I guess cornet, in fourth grade with the public music education system. And that was just a great gentle on ramp, because we didn't have a super competitive elementary, middle school magnet program kind of music, high pressure. So it was a nice start. When I got to high school, that's when the pressure changed. And so went on from there.
So were you taking lessons in piano and then also in cornet?
Yeah, so the cornet business was just, I won't say just something to do, but it was a musical thing to do that you had to choose orchestra or band. And I was not very good on violin, so nor did it sound very good. And I sounded a whole lot better on cornet, so cornet stuck. And it was fun, but piano was not fun. So at some point, my mom said, look, you can quit piano, but you really got to take on this trumpet thing full force. So that was a transition time in, I think, 7th or 8th grade, where trumpet took over, piano took a back seat, and here we are.
Did you ever try taking a piano apart?
Pianos have a lot of parts for whatever reason, and they're really big and heavy, and my parents wouldn't appreciate taking that apart and not putting it back together again.
Oh man, I used to get in so much trouble because I would always lift the lid of the piano and start pressing on the hammers, and I didn't understand why that was a big deal at the time. All right, so then after you learned piano, you learned cornet, you decided to get your degree at Virginia Tech. And did you start with music? Is that where you were going? Did you right away?
No, so of course Virginia Tech is not necessarily known for a music program. It's not Eastman or Juilliard, but rather I went for engineering. My dad was an electrical engineer, and so I grew up taking things apart and hanging out with him. And so I guess unconsciously I was just thinking that I was going to be an engineer when I grew up. And so I went there for mechanical engineering, and Virginia Tech is a big school, and my parents were very concerned about getting lost in a big school like that. In hindsight, though, it was a very good thing to go to such a big school because it had so many opportunities outside of the engineering program. So for instance, the music program. So I was practicing in a practice room one evening that first semester I was there, and the trumpet professor just knocked on the door and said, "Hey, who are you?" And from there, I had lessons from early on there, and then eventually took on a music major because I was playing in enough ensembles and taking enough courses that it worked itself out. So having a big school with a lot of opportunity like that really did make a difference in letting me explore more interest.
Mm-hmm. And then once you finished, both of these degrees that you were working on, you went back to school and did a master's in engineering, right? And specifically studying like acoustics. Is that correct?
Yes. So there was a strong acoustics program in the mechanical engineering department, coupled with active noise control. So active noise control meaning that you're adding energy to cancel out other kinds of sounds. And it was a very industrial program, so focused on aerospace and engines and industrial equipment per se, as opposed to anything musical. So you think of your Bose headphones, that's the kind of stuff that we were doing back in the 90s, canceling out ambient noise, ambient frequencies. So the professor that I had at the time, we were good friends, and as I was finishing my music degree, I was continuing to work for him, and he suggested that we do something on that side. And so we developed a model of a trumpet and then applied active noise control to that acoustic system. So, maybe novel in terms of industrial applications, but certainly interesting from a musical standpoint.
Yeah, sure.
How much of the application and studying that you did with the technical aspects, how much has it really affected the way you're doing things with your trumpet, your mouthpieces and stuff? Do you think it's made a difference where someone without that background might not have approached it or even gotten to the place where you've gotten when you've got there?
That's a very good question. So there's a lot of philosophy arguments and such in science and the engineering community about simulation versus empirical testing and empirical models. So there's a huge chasm between these two things. So my trumpet model, mathematical model, does predict, it does prove, it does, pick your word, demonstrate what happens to your embouchure and the acoustics inside of a trumpet. But when the rubber hits the road, you want to put that mouthpiece on your face and play it, because there are all sorts of elements and such that are not taken into account in a model like that. So, you're feeling gassy today because you had a whole bunch of beer, and that's not in the model, but that affects how our physical system feels and how our body moves, and you do things differently subconsciously that affect how this whole system works. So a lot of that stuff just does not exist in a mathematical model. So to answer your question, some things are very evident because of studying the acoustics. That sudden changes in diameter in a horn. So for instance, the gap of a mouthpiece, that makes a huge difference. And you can explain why that makes a huge difference. And from that, you at least know where to focus when you're actually going out and making something. It's not going to tell you exactly what to make, but it's going to say this part right here might be pretty important. So let's focus on that. And then you can design a good empirical experiment on that particular thing, and then get some more real world data to see if that hypothesis is true.
Right. Yeah, it gives you a very level playing field to start with instead of this is the way it was always done, So it gives you some understanding. Yeah.
Now, the way it's always been done, a lot of that is for a reason, right? So before mathematical models and such, people experimented because they didn't have anything else to do, or they couldn't do anything else. And lo and behold, they're going to discover a lot of the things that we might be able to more efficiently discover now because of a mathematical model giving us some direction. But history is to be learned from. And so you take the gap in a horn. Why is the gap there, right? It's probably a little bit of just because that was the way it could be done, right? There's some of that. But because it was the way it could be done at the time, it generated or it developed what we expect today, right? So expectations on how your horn feels and how it sounds is based on history. It's not based on efficiency and the best thing ever. It's based on history because that's the way it has been done. Not to say it's correct, but you can't just show up and make this completely different acoustic system and have it be accepted, right? That's not how the world works. And that is not appreciating history and not appreciating the environment and the culture that we have today.
Yeah,
Awesome.
And I think something that's fantastic, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday, Peter, was like your ability to combine your two different passions, both of music or trumpet playing, but also, with the mechanical engineering side. So as you're finishing up your degree here, what happened next? Were you looking for a job, making instruments somewhere, or looking for something else?
Well, sure, man. Every kid wants to grow up, to make trumpets. And so that was one relatively naive thought I had coming out of school, and the other was speaker design. So being acoustics and listening, we all appreciate great halls, right? And the other interest was designing concert halls and doing room acoustics. I had done some graduate work in that. So I did go interview with the graduate department at Penn State University. They have a very well-known architectural acoustics program. And, I went there and they patted me on the head and they said, that's really cute that you want to do that. But frankly, there's just not a lot of opportunity there. That entire industry is dominated by, some well-known folks and a lot of rule of thumb. It's not something that you go get a degree in and a career path. And so that was a little bit of a letdown. And the same thing on the instrument design. I went to interview with the Box-Elmer company at the time, and I frankly didn't have any idea on how to make horns. And it's a manufacturing company and not so much interested in new designs from some little kid that's wet behind the ears. And then the speaker building, I did electrostatic loudspeakers when I was in graduate school because I couldn't afford Martin Logan's, and so I made some. And they were great. But again, nobody is really interested. It's nice and it's interesting. It was educational, but it was not so much a career path. So as the clock was ticking down to graduation, as we're all too familiar with, you needed a job. So it was either play trumpet, in the area, or, go get an engineering job. And so I ended up at the Lexmark Corporation here in Lexington, Kentucky, doing computer printers out of all things, right? Not musical, but very relevant in terms of mathematical modeling of mechanical systems. And so a lot of that was very applicable. And as a result, though, I met a whole lot of interesting people. And when you're around engaging and intelligent and interesting people, man, you can learn all sorts of things.
Yeah. And
you're lucky too.
A little bit more about what you were doing at Lexmark, because I'm sure that had an impact of helping you out when you're starting to grow your own business later down the road.
Yeah, sure. So like most new engineers, I thought I knew everything coming in the door, and man, I'm just hot, right? And you quickly, if you're paying attention, you quickly get put in your place, which is a good thing. And so you're reminded that you don't know a whole lot, because nobody goes to engineering school to learn how to make electrostatic printers or electrophotography printers or inkjet for that matter. And so it was a nice way to reset and to keep learning. And not into learning coming out of school. So yeah, early on it was business inkjet, and then it was color laser printers, everything not to do with music. But it was a lot of empirical engineering testing and mathematical modeling, all the stuff that had been done before, thinking about very complex systems that are difficult to explain through a mathematical model. So just like we said before, you've got this empirical model and you've got a printer, and the model says you should do this, but the fact is, if you can't do it out here in the real world, it's really irrelevant. And so there's a lot of reality check that goes on in that. So going through all that development over 20 years, it was got to learn a bunch of new software skills, writing software, a lot of new mathematical skills, and then ultimately being a manager for 5 years and navigating the politics of corporate America, which is a whole adventure into itself. But, negotiations and conversations and public speaking and all those real world skills that there's no better way to learn than to get just dropped in the pit and work your way up.
But you're lucky that Lexmark was in the area of the country that it's in, because you still had your interest in music and you still had your toe in the door and knowing people. So you were very lucky to be in a very fecund area for the arts as well as your technology. So that was a lucky break for you.
And it's extremely lucky. That's a great way to put it. A lot of times you look back on a career and it looks very storybookish, right? You did this, and poof, here we are. And frankly, the majority of it is just pure dumb luck. I mean, why would I choose to work for Lexmark? And I'll tell you why I chose to look for Lexmark. I was at a career fair and I was waiting to talk to, I think, Hughes Aircraft. It was a company in Florida that was doing space transport vehicles, and they were looking for something to do acoustics on the module that holds the satellite that's going into space, because that's a noisy environment when that rocket's going up. And you need to do all sorts of acoustics to make sure that that gazillion-dollar satellite doesn't get ripped apart as it's going up. That sounds really cool, right? So the line was really long, and so I'm standing in line, and the table behind the aisle was Lexmark. And so I thought, hell, I'll go talk to Lexmark. I'm standing here. And that was a whole lot more interesting than the Hughes place, and ultimately interviewed that same day there. So again, dumb luck to end up with Lexmark and to end up in Lexington, Kentucky, and to find Vince DiMartino and CCM and Louisville. And frankly, we can drive everywhere from here for all these trade shows we go to. I mean, there's no better location to have been in. So very, very lucky in that regard.
Well, you have all the whiskey, and that's a great story too.
That's how we deal with all of our stress here.
It's actually bourbon, but that's okay.
Actually, I think my favorite thing about your shop was that coffee shop. Well, not my favorite thing, but one of my favorite things about visiting was that great coffee shop around the corner.
Yeah. No, we're in a great
have
part
a little bit of
downtown.
everything.
Indeed.
So, so while you're working for Lexmark, when did you start making mouthpieces, or did you start in mouthpieces, or did you start in something else during this time?
Yeah. So part of what makes me tick, looking back in hindsight, is that I like to create things. I like to make stuff. Honestly, it doesn't really matter what it is, but I like to make stuff. And so early on, after getting my foot in the door at Lexmark, I did want to make some parts. And so I bought a little cheap lathe and put it in the garage, and bought a piece of brass and cut some parts by hand. And it was really cute, right? And so you go to community band practice that night with these fancy little brass buttons that you made in your garage. And your buddy sitting next to you goes, "Whoa, that's cool, man. Can you make me a set?" Well, all right, whatever. And so you make another set. And after you make 10 sets, you're thinking, man, I could make money at this. And so that started in 2003 as more of a naive hobby turned business. And it poked along for a number of years. I found an investor, and we worked together, and it was great. But the mouthpiece thing is really the business to be in this industry. It's not trumpet finger buttons. And so in 2007, 2008, we had acquired some new machinery for the trim kit part that happened to work really well for making mouthpieces. And so we put together some mouthpieces, and obviously was working with Vince at the time, and he gets excited about all sorts of stuff. So he shows up and he's like, "Oh, this is great. We should do this. We should do that." And so we worked together for a number of years, and some other local folks, and here we are with some mouthpieces today.
So were your first mouthpieces, did you make them for yourself? Like, did you feel like you needed something different to play on? Or was it solely just like, oh, this is a great business idea, I want to do this?
Well, I wish I could take credit for thinking it was a great business idea, but frankly, it was just to prove to myself I can make a mouthpiece, right? Because it's this free-form thing. It's not like a mechanical part that has a print and some dimensions. It's got these curves, and it's got some aesthetic, and it's got engraving. It was more or less an exercise to prove to myself that I could make this complex object that was much more complex than what we were making before. Now, the fact I was playing on Terry Warburton's mouthpieces at the time. They worked really well. His rim design was great. We've been good friends. It was all great. And so we were making parts to fit his system at the time. Again, just because I actually might have one around here somewhere. Some of the very first ones didn't look very good, but they were functional. And you'd show up at community band, and you'd say, "Hey guys, check this out." And everybody's like, "Whoa, that's cool." And so it was fun. It was exciting. And as with a lot of hobbies, when hobbies turn business, that can make it not fun when it turns into a business. In this case, it's continued to be pretty fun, but it can be stressful as compared to just starting out by wanting to make one mouthpiece to say that you made one.
So for someone that's starting out that wants to try to make a mouthpiece, would you suggest maybe replicating something that's already out there first and seeing how close you can get? Or what would the beginning process, the beginning steps be?
That's a great question. I think a lot of people get into a business because they have something that they believe is better than what's out there. And that's great, because that innovation is what drives progress. What competition is what makes everybody better. So when we got into it, the first thing was to be able to replicate something that you knew. Because if you can't replicate, you don't know really where you're starting. And you can't really prove to yourself beyond a shadow of a doubt that you're able to make what you think you're making. And so in the beginning, it was about replication, such that we could prove to myself that I could make what I intended to make. And then from there, you can now extrapolate. It's like a kid playing trumpet. He's like, "I'm going to play some new stuff, and I'm going to make up all this new music." Well, you have to first learn by replicating great artists. And from that, you develop your own style. But you don't just come out with, oh, this is just all about me. You've got to go back and look at history and be able to imitate so that you have the toolbox and the tool set in order to extrapolate from there.
Yeah, and speaking of artistry too, I mean, your mouthpieces look beautiful. And something that's very unique about them is actually that backboard finish. Can you tell us a little bit about where that idea came from?
Sure. So as an engineer, I'm very focused on numbers and wanting to be able to be consistent in what we make. I don't really care what we make, but I want to make sure it's high quality and it's consistent. And one of the most inconsistent processes in any manufacturing is finishing, whether it's visual or whether it's deburring, something that's removing chips or something like that. A lot of times machinists and machines will make near perfect parts. And then they all get ruined by the guy next down the line who is just, sanding the part or buffing the part or breaking the edges or something like that. And it gets ruined, even though the guy made a perfect part. So I did not want to have that kind of situation. And so we try to minimize a lot of our finishing such that we don't induce a whole lot of error. Now, on the flip side, that's not an excuse for not finishing. I think that's a lame excuse for not finishing, saying that you don't want to affect the dimensions. It just means that we need to get very skilled at finishing such that we don't change those dimensions. So that brush finish on the backboard is critical because it's a very minimal amount of finishing such that the gap in your trumpet is not highly variable. So when we make a good part in the first place, we don't go screw it up by buffing it and over buffing it or over finishing it or over sanding it. So that finish is twofold. One, it's an aesthetic because I think it looks cool. And two, it minimizes the dimensional changes from finishing.
All right, so it's a hobby at first, and then you started making some money from it. And then now you're working at Lexmark and you're doing Pickett Brass. How did you finally make that leap to just do Pickett Brass full time?
Well, it almost killed me. So the decision probably would have been made for me eventually, but in the form of a caretaker. No, it was hard, but early on, there was a clear work ethic at Lexmark in order to keep up, and that work ethic was ingrained very early. So it gave me the energy and the focus and the drive in order to do both companies for a while, and they were both interesting, and so. It was great. You go to work, you do fun stuff. You come home, you're doing fun stuff. I mean, it was a business, it was work, but people could consider it a hobby. You're going to do something. Might as well make it fun or make money. So I did that for, I think that's 13 or 14 years. And the last 5 or 6 years were the hard ones because that's when the company started getting traction, especially with the mouthpieces. Mm-hmm. And, it takes a lot of attention. This is not a company that runs on autopilot. It's not a software replication situation, right? If we want to make $1, we have to do something. We have to make something. A big flaw in this business, as opposed to writing apps for iPhone or Android or something where that's automatically replicated. Yeah. So it was a dual role for a long time. But after a while, though, it was clear that I had to make a choice because Lexmark was going to suffer. My career at Lexmark was going to suffer because I wasn't all in. And Pickett Brass was going to suffer because I wasn't all in. And so I probably stretched that a couple of years past where I should have. But I did finally make a choice and took a retirement package from Lexmark in order to take the leap. Mm-hmm. And it was a leap because I was not making nearly as much money at the company as I was making at Lexmark. And so my poor parents were just crying because they're thinking, why did you leave that great career to go do this little thing in your garage? And, maybe that was the wrong decision. Maybe it was the right decision, but it was the decision at the time to take the leap and try it out.
And something that, Pickett has always been great at. Sorry, you're Pickett. I mean, Pickett Brass. It's always been great at. And something I'm always amazed about whenever I visit the shop is just like how efficient everything is. Can you talk a little bit about, like your production? Like, have you found ways to be maybe more efficient than some other mouthpiece makers that have helped to keep your prices down, but still maintain that quality?
Sure. So efficiency is often viewed negatively, right? We're trying to do things cheaper, and it's not about cheap. It's about efficiency. It's really a good word for it. When if you go to the Toyota plant that makes Camrys and Lexuses up in Georgetown, The Japanese way is about eliminating waste in movement, waste in material usage, waste in time. And it's not about cutting corners. It's about, not walking around as much. Why am I walking across the room to get that tool? Get another one of those tools and put it right in front of you. And when you do those things, life gets easier. It's not about working harder. You work the same, you actually work less and you get more done. And the quality is better because you're not tired of walking around. Or you haven't lost your train of thought because you had to walk across the room to get that tool. That's another huge thing. People talk about multitasking, right? And every time you have an interruption, it takes you some number of minutes to get back on track. It's incredibly destructive to your productivity. And so we are not the shining example of efficiency in a lot of regards, but we're trying to get better and we're very aware of it. So our system now is relatively efficient in that we've moved some things around so that parts move smaller distances, as opposed to, say, the mouthpiece comes out of the machine, walks all the way across the room, it does something, you come all the way back, you go here, right? That's waste. And so reducing that makes life easier. And when you don't walk around and carry mouthpieces around, you don't drop them as much on the concrete floor. So it's simple things like that, right? Every time you pick something up, you have a chance to drop it. Well, take those things out.
So in the way the things are set up, the efficiency and stuff, how do the number of people and placing those people, how is your model and how you're approaching people in this aspect working out?
So we engineers work best under constraints. If you said, design a new factory, big as you want, whatever you want, that is a hard problem, as opposed to saying, here, you've got 4,000 square feet, and there's a post here, and this door's only this wide, and there's a drain here you can't. Those are constraints that you have to work around. So we live with a bunch of constraints that we deal with. So when we move these machines into this shop, there's one machine that's 10,000 pounds and one that's 8,000 pounds. Well, once they get put on the floor, they don't move, right? Unless you pay someone a whole bunch of money to come move it for you. And so as we have acquired more machines, we have constraints because we can't simply rearrange all these big machines. But we have gotten lucky and worked around some of those constraints such that people are not walking on each other. They're not visually distracting to each other. You're not walking through each other's workspaces and causing distraction. So we've done some things like that in order to keep people separated even before social distancing was cool. Keep people separated in order for the distractions to be at a minimum.
So let's talk about the marketing aspects. How did you get your name out there? Obviously, the beginning was, hey, try my mouthpiece. But at some point, probably everyone in Lexington had one of your mouthpieces. So what came next?
Yeah, so that's this industry is a very slow moving industry, right? This is not you come out with a new iPhone and you just market the crap out of it to get it out. I mean, the cycle is very quick in a lot of technology things. The hype cycle in the music industry is slow, right? So I come out with the greatest thing ever, the greatest mouthpiece ever that plays double C's all day with no effort. It would still take time for people to accept that, no matter how good it is. And so you take a more conventional mouthpiece that has incremental or some pretty substantial changes, it's still going to take time because they don't know who you are. And so along with a website, which is kind of, I guess, table stakes these days, you have to show up. This is a face business. You want to put that thing on your face and try it and see what it feels like, and you want to talk to people. This is a very much person-to-person, face-to-face relationship business. And as a result, it grows very slowly at first because you can only talk to so many people. So we went to ITG, right, with a booth, and people just walk up to you because they've never seen you before. And they start to recognize you after year after year after year. And eventually they're going to stop and say hello. And then you buy a mouthpiece because we had a good relationship. And then you know what? You feel good about your purchase. And so you go to your friend and you say, hey man, I talked to this guy at ITG and he was so nice and this mouthpiece plays great. That kind of word of mouth marketing is invaluable. It's not fast and it's not efficient per se, but it's the highest possible quality marketing that you can have. And over a relatively long period of time, that is the most solid form of customer satisfaction that I think you can create.
Yeah, and I know that every experience that I've had with Pickett, whether it's with you or Eric or Taylor or anybody at all these, the trade shows like ITG and such, it's always been like a really positive experience for me. And I feel like you guys put a big focus on that. And just as a musician, I appreciate that. You know what I mean? Because you're interested in trying to help us find the tools that we need to do our job easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And is that something that you think has played a big role in your continued success?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We've all dealt with desperate salespeople, right? Please buy this, and it's like an immediate put off. Right? I mean, right out of the gate. So, and again, I know that people have lots of options. There are tons of mouthpiece makers out there, and everybody makes decent and good stuff, and it's all different, and it's a bunch of variety. I mean, you couldn't be in a better place, right? Especially when you go to NTC or ITG or any of these big shows. I mean, what's better than 10 mouthpiece makers that you can all go try stuff? I think that's great. And so when we all know each other, and so it does not make any sense to try to put down your competitor in order to lift me up, because that's just going to come back and bite you. And the fact is, nobody has the end all mouthpiece. And so if you go into it thinking that arrogance is just going to kill you, because it's not going to work for you, because your teeth are different and it doesn't work. And that's okay. So we try to go in with a very cordial, respectful. The fact is, we don't know everything, and every time we meet a new player, we learn something new. So I think that goes a long way to just being humble and respectful, and trying to listen and to learn from everybody that we talk to.
And I know that something else too that's very great that you guys offer is like shop visits. Can you tell us a little bit about like how that works in case there's somebody who's listening now who wants to at some point come by your shop and try out some mouthpieces?
Sure. People should absolutely go to a shop, even if it's not our shop. They should go to the Bach plant. They should go to Terry's shop in Florida. I think having some appreciation for where your equipment comes from and how it's made and designed goes a long way to building your credibility and your knowledge for not only yourself, but for your studio and your students. So people that come to our shop, 9 times out of 10, they've just got wide eyes, like, wow, I've never seen this before. That's amazing. It's like hearing a great musician for the first time. It's like, wow, I get to finally see you in person and to see what you do. I think that's a huge connection builder. We're happy to show you how we make things, and I think it goes a long way into creating more appreciation for what goes into it, as opposed to somebody who has no appreciation. They'll go, why does this mouthpiece cost so much? I mean, it should cost $4. I mean, I saw one on eBay for $4 and it was gold plated. What's wrong? Why are you charging me so much? Let me show you, right? And it's not to justify prices. It's more to help appreciation across the board on that.
So speaking of the design process, can you take us through that? I know one of the things that blew my mind is you told me you write your own software for this stuff, and you have tons of machines, and you've never made a mouthpiece by hand, but I just want to know how it works. Can you tell us how it works?
Magic, right? So early on, we had a mouthpiece that we wanted to replicate, and there was no way to replicate it, right? We didn't have this coordinate measurement machine behind me, and so we took some epoxy and we just swooshed it into the mouthpiece, and we waited for it to dry, and we said a prayer so that it would come out. We took it out, we cut it in half, and I put it on a scanner, like a computer scanner, and I took a picture of it and blew it up, and so now I had this picture of a mouthpiece. Wow, that's great, but I have no way to translate that into any machine that we had. And so you had to do something. So I took that experience from Lexmark and took that picture, not a very good picture, and translated it into a program that I could put on one of our very early CNC lathes, like a rudimentary mouthpiece. And that process was extremely inefficient and not very accurate. And so as a result, the early mouthpieces were wildly big, small. I mean, just no consistency through that process from a mold all the way through. But that was the start to understand how to get from a real mouthpiece to a real mouthpiece on the other side. So that software, which started in, I guess, 2007, 2008, continually gets updated. I made an update yesterday. And so over 12, well, how many years is that? 12 years, right? It's been updated every week for 12 years. And so as you can imagine, it's advanced to allow us to do all sorts of things now that we couldn't do out of the gate. And early on, we didn't have the money to buy a full-fledged SolidWorks or Mastercam or these big industrial packages. And plus, they were wild overkill for what we were doing. And so it made sense, right? It wasn't hard. And most importantly, it was interesting to do. And so it gave me another outlet for creating something. And then as a result, though, the process now is even more elegant than I could have anticipated then.
And speaking of like the design process and all that, I know you started out and you had a focus in trumpet mouthpieces, but now you guys are making mouthpieces for horn, tuba, trombone. Who did you like develop those with as your background was in trumpet? So how did you come across that product line?
Right, I can barely spell trombone, but so in terms of markets, the natural progression, of course, is to start with trumpet. It's the largest hardware junkie market in the world in brass instruments. Now the next is trombone, and trombonists are just as junky as trumpet players are in terms of gathering mouthpieces. And so early on, we had purchased a machine that was wild overkill for making trumpet mouthpieces, and it allowed us to make trombone mouthpieces. And so Wycliffe Gordon happened to be in town, and we had made a mouthpiece, a crossover mouthpiece based on an old Alcast design where it had a trombone rim on a trumpet shank so that people that were used to playing trombone could get their face onto a trumpet. And he happened to come by, and we had one sitting on the desk, and he played it for 15 minutes, and of course we're all like, whoa, because he played the trumpet like a badass. And so we obviously gave him one of those, but he was playing some trombone mouthpieces, and we took those and we made some for him. So that was one of those fortuitous, just dumb luck that he happened to be in one place at some time that allowed us to connect like that. So Wycliffe was the very first artist. Now Wycliffe is known as like a force of nature, right? And so you put something in front of him and you just pray that it holds together because he just puts it all in. So he can play anything, and he's tough to gauge because he doesn't use a whole lot of words. And so I don't know whether he was just being nice at the time, saying, this is great. It was the first one we made, right? There's no way that one was great. So we went through a few prototypes, and he's still playing on them. And but that was the basis for our early trombone work.
Yeah, and it seems like you've done a lot of work with different artists too. Going back to the trumpet mouthpiece series, there's, you've spent a lot of time with Vince DiMartino, Alan Guzzuti, and Jens and all of that. And how has that like helped you to kind of pick their brain and be able to make that product that is enveloping everything that they're talking about or how they're approaching the instrument?
Right. That requires a lot of translation. It's like listening to a beginner trumpet player. And you say, what does it feel like? And they go, I don't know. It just feels funny. I get all tingly, right? And they're trying to develop a vocabulary to describe this new set of feelings and sensations. And you take somebody like Jens and Vince, they've had a lifetime of those sensations. And so they've got a lot more words, and they tend to use them, and they'll just keep on using them. And listening to that and gelling all that stuff together has been the most interesting, because I think they've experienced a lot. They've been able to power through like a lot of young players. I mean, hell, I did that. I was playing on these gigantic mouthpieces. Why? Well, because I could, right? I'm tough, I'm strong. And you just did it. You didn't think about it. Dumb and strong is the way I characterize that. Whereas as these guys got older, even though they were very strong and adept, they need to be more efficient, right? In order for careers to continue and not just blow out. And students that figure that out earlier are the ones that make it. But anyway, so these guys have lots of vocabulary, lots of experience, and lots of scenarios that they can reflect on and test things out in. And so working with them, it was very fast in development.
And I'm glad you mentioned Jens and also testing things out, because we have a little video of you guys having some fun with the Brandenburg. So I'm going to go ahead and play that for everybody. And then I'd like to hear how you created that sound, which people are about to hear. So here we go.
Go ahead.
All right, so how did you accomplish that squeak, and how did you get to be that perfect pitch?
Yeah. I have monster high chops. No,
All that soprano cornet work, huh?
Years of soprano cornet work have generated double C's in my vocabulary. No, I've never played a double C in my life. No, it's one of these things where day in, day out, we're doing a lot of conventional work, right? And so somebody sees some funny video on Facebook or something and say, hey, we could probably do that. And so we make some parts in our spare time or over the weekend or something. And that was a little exercise with obviously a little squeaker toy in the horn somewhere. And, nobody better to do that with than Jens, who's like, oh, that's great. As opposed to a lot of the flaming emails we got from people, in terms of you cheating and that's a jerky thing to do. I mean, whoa. I mean, look, we're just having fun, okay? This is not, claiming to do anything that we didn't do. But yeah, that was great.
Yeah, that was fun. And I know we want to transition into Blackburn, but just before we do that, could I ask you a question about like the educator kit that you offer through like Pickett Brass? Was that something that was originally like your idea? For those of you like that don't know, they offer this educator kit that comes with which we can order a bunch of different tops and backboards and mix them together. Can you tell us a little bit behind the idea for this?
Sure. So when we go to trade shows, you basically see a gigantic educator kit with numerous options that we offer. And the reason we do that is because I don't know what you're going to want when we meet up at ITG. And so people really appreciated that experience, but ITG is only once a year. And so we had to be able to repackage that and distribute that such that you could have ITG in your studio. And because teachers clearly saw the benefit of having a uniform fitting kit in order to get their first, second, third year students or whatever dialed in so that they're not fighting their equipment and they can go back to music. And so those ed kits were a way to package up the ITG experience in little portable kits for teachers and professors to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm sure, Marty, you would have loved to have one of these. Imagine just a box full of...
Well, it's funny you mentioned it because the first time I ever heard of anybody doing this was back in the late 60s, early 70s with Walter Lawson. I don't know where this kid is, but he actually made all by hand. It was a big wooden box. And it had tons of different backboards, cups, rims, and I think some separate shanks. So you could put a backboard in a different shank. And you could put them together any possible way you could. And he would just take it to every good horn player he knew, everybody, and just say, and then write down exactly who liked what and come up with the common denominators. And that's how he came about using and designing his mouthpieces. I don't know where that kid is, but that was a long time ago. But it's basically sounding exactly what you do on a daily basis.
Sure, and Terry Warburton did the same thing. He had his master kits for his dealers such that he could package up the ITG experience. Yep. It makes perfect sense in order to get good product in front of people that can actually use it.
Yeah.
So we're waiting for our horn educator kit, Peter.
Who was the horn player that you tapped to get the horn part going?
Oh man, I tell you, horn players are tough. I tell you, it's horn players and tuba players. That market is so different than the trumpet one that I mentioned that I'm so familiar with. Horn players and tuba players seem to be in these groupings. So the trumpet line is a full matrix. So we make small cups to big cups, shallow cups to deep cups, and there are people all throughout that continuum. In terms of trumpet, or in terms of horn and tuba, it doesn't work like that. So we started by making a full matrix of tuba mouthpieces and horn mouthpieces. And like 80% of those were completely irrelevant to anybody. Technically, they made sense. But instead, horn players are either here, here, or here. It's like these three groups. And so we made stuff for this person, and this person shows up and said, man, that's not very good. That's not good at all. I really want this, this, and this. So we do this, and then this person wasn't happy. And then this person shows up and says, man, both of those are not very good. I really need this. And it's like these groupings. And so same with tuba. It's these very specific places that people have come to.
I have a theory about why that comes out with these two instruments is because the resistance. The trumpet has very consistent resistance, and you can change it with the cup, and the length of tube is finite. And the trombone is a bigger version of that. It's pretty consistent about its efficiency of length, the mouthpiece and stuff. But the tuba and horn are way inefficient. Those two instruments have to create their own resistance. And much of a player does it automatically within his body before the mouthpiece is even in play. So it's much more internalized and personalized, and which is why I can't play this. This is impossible. It's because you are already compressing your air and energy in your throat and your lungs, all these different ways. Where trumpet players, if you did that, you wouldn't get a note out. So that's the reason whenever I've tried to play the trumpet over the years a little bit, it was like, Jesus, this just plays itself compared to the horn. It's wasting energy. So I think it might have something to do with that, because those two instruments have to create their own resistance more than the others.
Marty, do you have any videos of you playing trumpet?
No, I don't think so. Most of the time it was at a break or something, or somebody who said, can you play this? And I would play something ridiculous not good, but ridiculous.
I'm just saying I've got some excellent horn videos out there.
I've seen your expertise on the horn. I suspect that you might want to keep that buried. But
All right, so back to trumpet. Tell us about your acquisition of Blackburn.
Yeah, so making trumpet mouthpieces is easy, right? That's one piece of press. And, trumpet has 100 parts in it that you have to make. And, by the way, put them all together. And so that was a huge leap. And so there were many discussions while making mouthpieces that we should make a trumpet. But that was so far complexity-wise, it just never came to be. So my wife, Kristen, and I had lunch with Cliff and Bunny Blackburn after the, what year was that? ITG in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, hosted by, Bill Stoneman and Rebecca Wilt. And we walked outside after we packed up and we had lunch. We had known him for a while, just thought it was lunch. And so Cliff said, we've been thinking about retirement. And we're curious if you'd be interested in continuing on with the Blackburn trumpet thing. Well, if I hadn't spit my food out, I probably should have. But I thought about what I was going to say. And, of course, I said yes. And then Kristen kicked me under the table. But it was a relatively informal and sudden discussion. Now, that was 7 or 8 years before it actually happened. So there were years and years of learning how to make trumpet bells the way that Cliff makes them, never mind all the rest of the little details and doodads that go into that. So that finally did get announced, of course, January 1st of 2016. That was when it was official. And so it took forever to get there, but by nature of the complexity, that's what it took.
Did a lot of his people come with you when the company changed?
No, we got no people. So Tina Erickson was working for him at the time, and she was not going to, of course, move up to Lexington. And, she was looking for something better to do too. So there was a natural progression in terms of the culture of the company and transition like that. And so that worked itself out okay. It wasn't like Cliff just, disappeared and, left everybody hanging. So we took all his machines up to Lexington here. And then, of course, Cliff came up. It's about, 3 hours, 2.5 hours, 3 hours from where he is. So he would come up once a month for several days, and we'd have a long agenda on what we were going to learn how to do and all the questions that we had along the way. And so that took probably a good solid 2 years. That was a very bumpy learning curve.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you're very hands-on here, Peter. What did you take up in terms of this transition of production?
Yeah, so in the beginning, I took everything on because that's how I am. And in the first couple of years, though, of learning how to make bells, it was evident that I wasn't going to get it fast enough in order to meet the time frame. So at the very beginning of that transition and training, it was, again, evident on that. So Greg Sutherland came on board early on. He was the first, Blackburn employee here, learning how to make bells. And so he's the one that makes the bells completely from scratch today. And he and I both learned how to do it, but he's the one that actually did it. And so when we opened up on day one in January, he was making successful bells because that was the one super high risk element of this acquisition, that if you couldn't make a bell, you didn't got it. So that was what we're waiting on. So on day one, though, then we had a couple guys making lead pipes and slides, and one guy making valve sections, and then I was doing piston fitting and doing the hand engraving in order to replicate what Cliff had, so that when our horns went out the door, they were indiscernible in how they played and how they looked from what Cliff made. Again, making sure that we can replicate what he has spent 30 years putting out there, who am I to say that, oh, we can make it all the better? We have to start by replicating so that we know and appreciate where it came from.
All right, and now we're in this very strange time with the pandemic.
Yeah.
That changed your workflow or their day-to-day?
Yeah, it's been tough. As I know, it's been tough for everybody. It's we puddled along, of course, through March, and then the bottom fell out basically in March and April. Sales just went to nothing. Again, everything was just crumbling in society. The Kentucky governor closed all non-essential businesses there in, I guess, April. It's all a blur now. But we were closed. We had to close the shop. It was 6, 7, 8 weeks. And we did a little bit of work from home, obviously email and things like that. And we would come in once or twice a week and ship whatever orders that did show up. But that was a sudden shutdown, and that was incredibly difficult. Just because, here's your day-to-day activity that just gets shut off. Never mind, everything around you is like that too, right? So kids were out of school, doing homeschool, and my wife works for UK, and so she was at home working, and you have this sudden little nuclear family, and that's it, as opposed to having any social outlets or anything like that. So that was tough, and I think that was tough for everybody in the shop, just a sudden change. So as you got used to that, we then had to reopen, and so now you've got another transition, and so that transition was difficult too, and it probably took, I would say, about 4 or 5 weeks for us really to kind of go, okay, this is what work is about again. Okay, now I remember where the coffee machine is. Everything had to kind of restart over. It's like starting a new job. So in those last few weeks, we did take advantage of the upheaval, and we did move some facilities around and things like that while it was relatively quiet in terms of day-to-day. So that was something that was good that came out of it. It allowed us to reorganize, allowed us to reorient ourselves to it, and honestly get excited about work again, because coming back to either a backlog or just cleaning the dust off, it's like, this is gonna suck. So we had something to be excited about, and things are cruising pretty well again now. And I'm waiting for how the fall semester starts out and how that's going to affect the market. I think that's the next unknown.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any future plans or projects in the works that you want to share with us?
Well, let's see. So the Blackburn thing has been going now for 4 years, right? So we have, I think, reached our stride on producing. Starting this year, we make our own pistons. That was something that Cliff Blackburn had not done. And so we have worked that out in order to now manufacture those in-house. So that, from a supply continuity standpoint, is very good for us, because now we make all the parts here, and that allows us to have some consistency and to some certainty to supply chains. Because what have we learned here in the last 3 months is that supply chain continuity is a big deal. So having a good supply chain here has made a huge difference. The second benefit of that is that we can now manufacture very specific valve sections. So one thing that Cliff was limited by is the pistons that he got from Canstel and Schilke had a certain port pattern. And so we made casings for him, and he made his own casings for a long time and valve blocks based on that, but he was limited by the port patterns on the pistons. So what's the natural progression for the Blackburn name is to go make a flugelhorn, say, right? It's not a horn, it's not a trombone, it's another trumpety kind of thing. But people know that a flugelhorn has a different slide structure, different port structure. Oh, and by the way, it's a really tiny bore size. And so you can't take medium large trumpet pistons and make a flugelhorn around it and have it play like any flugelhorn that we want. So the next project's probably a Blackburn Flugelhorn, because we have now gotten all the tools together. We have the capability to manufacture a custom valve section like that is correct. It's acoustically correct, and it's aesthetically correct. Oh yeah, right, and we make our own bells, so now we can make a flugelhorn bell. So that's a complex project, but it's the natural extension, and hopefully we'll see one next year or two.
That's really exciting.
Yeah.
Actually, I think I might know someone that is in the market for a flugelhorn right now.
We'll talk later.
All right, so now we're going to take a quick break and check in with Lucas Teston for a SOFA segment highlighting emerging arts organizations.
to another episode of the Sofa Segment, coming to you from the comfort of my basement in Kansas City. Different couch, different hair, same attitude as always. We're exploring the world of new musical endeavors done by musical entrepreneurs. I am here with 4 of the creators and co-founders of Less Than 10 out of Austin, Texas. So what can you tell me about it, James?
We are a collective of 9 musicians based in Austin, Texas. We formed, in response to the pandemic shutting down a lot of our concerts, our gigs, our commissions, and we put something together to keep making music, to keep productivity out there, and to make something new at a time when a lot of things were being shut down. And I'm James Bhatia. I am the artistic director of Less Than 10. I sing and play bass and write music for the group.
Hi everyone, my name is Kyle Jones. I am the saxophonist for the group and also serve as publicist.
I'm Alan Redamoso. I'm a guitarist, composer, and donations liaison and manager for Less Than 10.
I'm Elizabeth Kilpatrick. I serve as the artist coordinator for the group, and I also play violin.
Tell me a little bit about your goal with your target audience.
Oftentimes we'll play some of my songs, which sort of crosses boundary between concert music and indie songwriting. It kind of works for our ensemble, who all had these eclectic backgrounds. When we first got together, our target audience was just, the immediate people around us. We just formed the group, so we were fresh off the boat and just getting something out there into the vacuum that is the internet.
I do remember when we first started, it was like this moment where everything had just like shut down and everybody.
All right.
All right, that was great. Thank you, Lucas. Less Than 10 is a wonderful example of an organization adapting successfully to our current climate. We look forward to following all of Less Than 10's future endeavors. And on that note, Peter, do you have any advice for emerging mouthpiece builders or craftsmen or people that are interested in getting kind of into the repair and creation field of our instrument industry?
Yeah, great. It's a great industry. I think even though there's been a lot of talk about the demise of music in schools and things like that, music is part of our culture worldwide. And so I think there's plenty of opportunity for people to participate, whether it's players or whether it's artisans and craftsmen. And so the nice thing about the repair business and making things is that it is not really capital intense to get started, right? You don't have to go buy $1 million machine in order to go make some mouthpieces. You just need a few $100 and a lathe and some brass and a little tool, and you can make stuff. So go do it, right? There's a lot of talk and woulda, shoulda, coulda, but at the end of the day, you just need to go do it, and try it out. It's like reading a book on how to play trumpet. You can read it all day, but until you put that horn up to your face and make a sound, it's really not real. So just go do something. The second thing is to appreciate history. We talked a little bit about the historical precedents and things and how our instruments are made. Appreciate what's out there. Arrogance is when you show up and you think that you have all the answers and you haven't studied anything about what came before you. That's a real turnoff to the industry, to me personally, and I think to a lot of people in the industry. So appreciate what's been done before, and then leverage off of that. Nobody makes great things by standing on their own 2 feet. You always stand on shoulders. So I think that's something to remember.
And I did notice that you had an intern on your website. Is that something that you offer, or how would you advise students intern with craftsmen such as yourself?
Yeah. So with the amount of companies that are out there, there's not a lot of opportunity. I mean, there's just scarcity in that regard. So with the Eastern Kentucky University down the street from us, they have a music industries program that not only you get a music degree and you play, but you also study marketing, artist management, and you're required to co-op with a company. So that can mean like work retail at a music store, right? Or work at a repair shop, or work here. So there are actually two full-time guys here, Robert Lawson and Zach Woodson, who both came out of that EKU program. They both interned here for several years. And they found that it's interesting enough and was a good fit for them. And so they're now here full-time. It's a nice opportunity for me because you get a year-long interview process, right? And it's good for them because they get their hands dirty and they find out if they don't like it or if they do like it. So internships back in engineering school were huge. I mean, just huge, right? Because it gave you experience, it gave you some awareness before you hit the real world, and that's very, I think, very important. So anyway, I mean, even if it's working for free, and I'm in all seriousness, it's like Zach would come by and after school and he would sweep the floor, quite literally, right? That's just to be present is huge, and to be willing to do that is huge. So you put yourself in the right environment so that maybe you can get lucky because there's a position open or there's something that you're good at. So yeah, I think internships are a great way to start, and be open to anything.
Great. All right, so you're almost out of the hot seat, but before that point, Marty has a few questions for you.
These are some fun questions, just four little fun questions that are sort of based off Inside the Actor's Studio that was done those many years ago. So we do this with everybody because it's just sort of quirky, and it gives us a chance to end on a lighter note, pardon the pun. What is your favorite note?
Oh, let's see. Not a missed note.
Okay.
No, it's interesting. So, we play B-flat trumpets, right? Which don't play any of the right pitches for the names of the notes. And so it is very awkward to talk about your favorite note because it's not really the favorite note. Oh gosh, I don't know.
You're answering your question as the engineer. Very much so. So I think you answered your own question. You have, depending on the day and the platform. Okay,
right.
Tell us a story of a time that you fell flat and how you turned that into a sharp situation.
Oh man, let's see. I have been at ITGs and I have stuck my foot in my mouth multiple times, not knowing who I was speaking to. So I don't even remember who it was, but well-known trumpet players, and you're like, "Hey, my name is Peter," and they go, "Well, do you know who I am?" And I go, "No."
No.
Because I have not been. I am not a super trumpet head, right? I don't know who the second principal player in Cleveland is. I just don't know, right? And there are people that know everybody up and down and all these people. So as much of a player as I want to be, I just don't appreciate the landscape as well as I should. So I've stuck my foot in my mouth a lot of times and not knowing who people are. Now, on the flip side, that helps me out because when that intimidating person shows up, who are you? It helps me not be intimidated. And once I find out who they are, I do get intimidated. So
yeah. That's cool. I think we might know an answer to this, but it would be curious to see what your third career would be. If you could go back and do it all over again, what profession would you pick and why? You already have two professions that you put together, so it would be very curious to see if you had a dream of a third option.
Well, so I gave a talk at Virginia Tech a couple years ago on what success means, right? So I often get held up a successful alumni. And success means something different to everybody, right? So some people it means having a big paycheck. Some people means having a corner office and a big title, so on and so forth. But one of the things that has ended up being really important to me is building a legacy. And the legacy that is getting built here may not make me a multi-gazillionaire, but the legacy that is built here is something that would be very difficult for me, if not impossible, for me to do at Lexmark. I mean, they're not going to make the Pickett laser printer. Right, they're just not going to do it, right? And they're not going to rename the company after me. And so from a legacy building standpoint and having some impact on a very recognizable impact on an industry, this has provided something that I don't think I could get a lot of other places. I've thought about having started this earlier, but I don't think I would have been as successful if I started coming out of college because I would have been arrogant. I would not have known nearly the skills that I would have needed. And I think it would have been mediocre at best, whereas the way it's built up now. So if it was to be something else, it would have been totally different. So I think the automotive industry is kind of fun and interesting. And if I had started in the late 90s and gotten my experience 25 years and then gone and worked for places like Fisker or Tesla, I mean, that would have been amazing. I think that would have been the other career path. That would have worked out to me. I think it would have been boring the first 10 years.
Yeah, I could see the Pickett line of cars. That's kind of a cool, that's got a ring to it,
Yeah.
So
lastly,
what's your favorite word and your least favorite word?
So I ask anybody in the shop what my favorite word is, and they'll say it's process. Because process is what makes life easy. So whether it's brushing your teeth in the morning or whether it's making trumpets, it's all about process. And When the process is elegant and easy, life is fun. It's when things are hard and a pain in the ass, it makes it not fun. I don't care what it is. So process. What do you say? The word I don't like.
The least favorite.
Gosh, arrogance, just for what it means.
Yeah, you've said that a number of times, so I'm not surprised.
Oh man, it is the most offensive attitude and personality trait that I have zero patience for. It's incredible. It's incredible. Yeah, so I can't say enough about that.
Yeah, and there's none of that in the trumpet world in general. That's another character that doesn't exist, you know.
What are you trying to do that, Marty?
I know, he set that up. I had to leave it. Thank you so much, Peter, for sharing your experiences with us. We had a great time. I think everybody learned a lot.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and Peter, you know, thank you for everything that you're doing for the brass world, and thank you for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedule to both share your story and the story of Pickett Brass. I also would like to thank everybody at home for tuning in, and also to remind you to like the Brass House Network on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube for information on upcoming episodes. From Natalie, Marty, and myself, we hope to see you all again and on the next episode of Sharp Ideas. Stay safe and stay sharp.
Sharp Ideas is a Brass House Network production and is hosted by myself, Jonathan Bhatia, and Martin Hackleman. Our team consists of Miranda DeBlawe, Lucas Teston, and Joe Venezia. We'll see you next month for episode number 4.